Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm a bookseller at Literati bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're so pleased to welcome Arinze Ifeakandu in conversation with Ebenezer Agu this evening in support of God's Children Are Little Broken Things. Just a quick webinar overview for those who are just joining us. The chat is closed, but you can keep the chat window open. I'll be sharing links to purchase books from Literati throughout the event. The Q&A feature is available to you. I encourage you to submit any questions you might have whenever you might have them using the Q&A, and I'll ask a selection of those questions at the conclusion of the conversation this evening. And live transcription is available to you as well on your toolbar. If you're watching us later on YouTube, there are always links to purchase books from Literati in the description directly below me, or you can also subscribe to our channel to be kept up to date with all of our At Home with Literati events once they become live there. And as a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan or the Ann Arbor area, of course, our doors are open to the public for in-store shopping. But most of all, we would just like to thank you for your attendance this evening, or this morning, or this afternoon, or much later this evening, depending on where and when in the world you may be joining us. So without further ado, I'll introduce tonight's author and our interlocutor. Arinze Ifeakandu was born in Kano, Nigeria, currently lives in Tallahassee, Florida, an AKO Kane Prize for African Writing finalist and a Public Space Writing Fellow. He is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. His work has appeared in A Public Space, Guernica, The Kenyan Review, One Story, and Redemption Song and Other Stories, the Kane Prize for African Writing 2018. God's Children Are Little Broken Things is his first book. Speaking with him this evening, Ebenezer Agu lives in Ann Arbor, where he is a candidate at the University of Michigan's Helen Zell Writers Program. He is a poet, nonfiction writer, literary critic, and the founder of 2035 Africa, an annual anthology publishing African poets between the ages of 20 and 35. In 2020, he was nominated for the Future Awards Africa Prize for Literature and was recently named in the magazine Open Country's special issue on the next generation of African literature. Please join me in welcoming Arinze Ifeakandu and Ebenezer Agu into your living rooms.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And Arinze, I don't know, like, first of all, I've been like waiting for you to finish writing this book since when? Since 2014. And so I'm like, I've been very excited since the book like came out from like the book launch in Brooklyn, and having to like read your stories again after like taking a break from then. So yeah, this is like, I think this is like the final leg for you in the book tour, and I'm happy that like we are like being the last people to conclude the event, which is great. Mm-hmm. And so I know that like you've been busy with your book launch since the launch in Brooklyn. I imagine that despite the excitement of finally having your book out there after many years of working in private, there is still the physical and mental exertion of the promotion that is this tour. So I would want to ask how you are doing. I hope you've been making out some time to rest and, you know, take the necessary breather.
I'm doing my best. You know me, like if anything stresses me out, I'm just like, sleep. So yeah, I've been sleeping a lot, which I think, you know, everybody should do if they can. Yeah, and while I was in New York, I had the good fortune of just eating whatever I wanted, which I haven't had that luxury since I returned to Florida.
Yeah,
especially because, you know, it's not a phone call away. Yeah, so yeah, I'm like, in as much as I can, I take care of myself. Yes.
Okay. That's great. And I mean, we were in Brooklyn together, and so I came back to And I was thinking how it was like such an uncommon privilege that in Brooklyn you could easily like type African restaurant near me and you'd find a place that's like 15 minutes walk away from you.
Mhm.
So I can like I completely understand that the aspect of eating whatever you want, which is very
Like,
important.
I think a lot of people like underrate how not just having your stomach full of food or feel like, but just eating something that speaks to your spirit,
Yeah.
how necessary it is for living. You know what I mean? Like how how much it does for like just your mental health and yeah. Well, mhm.
Yeah, that's completely relatable. So we are going to like we don't have like so much time, unfortunately. So I've been thinking, so between the time we left in Soka and when your book was published, I mean I had this break in reading your stories. So when I started reading God's Children, I noticed a difference in the movement of your plot and even in the ways you ended some of the stories. I mean, the mastery in the writing is so impressive. I'm not surprised. I mean, you're a very good writer, but I was nevertheless excited to witness that. It's like in the stories, no moment is lingered on more than is necessary. Time is so precisely managed in developing the characters. I mean, that management of time in the stories is something I first like consciously realized in reading Jhumpa Lahiri's The Lowlands, how she tells a story of like 3 or 4 generations and it flows so smoothly. And you know, you could you could see the same thing in like some of the stories in God's Children. And like only the absolutely necessary details are allowed. Even the endings, I noticed that like some of the stories I'd read before end differently in this publication. Some of them seem to to have like, you know, before aimed for a fine resolution in their previous versions. But like in this current one, the confidence is so assured that they've realized all they need to do. So it was kind of like making me think that perhaps our business as writers is not like resolution. Perhaps we need to like just declare the matters arising. And it was something so like well done in these stories. And I thought like I was thinking what had like changed between like those previous versions and like this publication.
um Thank you so much for that. I think for me mostly it was especially in talking about just you know like not having a sense of like final resolutions. I think for me with the stories, I became more concerned with because I know that like when writing the earlier versions of the stories, I was still figuring out how to end the story, right? And I remember like way early on, I would basically just kill off a character because that was my own idea of how how a story should end, or like that was my own idea of how I could end the story, right? But I think for me, at some point, I stopped looking for resolutions, and I think like just the conflict itself, the presentation of the conflict became like was enough for me. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
as long as I could show a world, a situation um, that was compelling and well realized, I think the story generally would like move to its own end. Um, and I remember, I remember like like questions around like okay what I've had questions around like the ending of what the singers say about love, for example, right? People asking me what do I think is going to happen next, do these characters come back together or not? And I think for me having that in even the books I read, I know that like having that sense, that feeling of continuity after the end of a story has always been important to me, um, because like what I have done is like present lives and a sense of a life. Um, and life is continuous, so that like even when someone loses a loved one, other members of the family continue and they continue to live on in the memories of people. And I don't think anything is ever fully resolved. Um, I think even in living, we just keep revising versions of ourselves. And I think, like, for me, just generally, like, I also think that, and I don't know if I wouldn't say that this was intentional, right? But I think in writing generally, especially when we've sat down with our ideas for a long time and tried them over and over again, we begin to find that, like, our subject matter, the things we are occupied with, um, they begin to even show in the structure. You know what I mean? Like, and that's like where the mind does its own thing. Um, and back to the ending, I think, especially like, especially with like stories like where the heart sleeps. Like those particular stories, I knew that, like, the conflicts were just so. When I wrote the stories, I was like a teenager, like 17, and then, like, and the conflicts were just too big for me. But when I did understand the situation better, the stories were easy. But the ending, I think, like, of that particular story, for example, I remember my editor saying, "I know, Arinze, you're going to say no to this, but what if we took out one last paragraph and we ended it here?" And it just felt so abrupt to me, and yet so right. You know what I mean? Like, and I think after I had moved away from that, like, thing where, an ending had to have a resolution, I think, like, somewhat another thing in writing an ending that I did usually was I would have one, you have the sort of final event, and then you have like a paragraph that sort of nothing really happens, but it's just language and sentence that sort of serves as a form of closure, right? And I'm like, yeah, this in this particular story isn't necessarily it's not. And just sort of seeing the effects of, you know, and I think that's like, when trusting, like, with that particular story, I was like, okay, this is so different from what I would do usually. And I was like, okay, let me trust her and see, and it actually worked out well. So there's like just a bit of everything that came into that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay, first, like the thing you said about killing off a character, because I was reading, I think, first with the Dreamer's Litany, and like some of the stories I'd read before, and I was wondering, did someone die? Was the end of some of the stories, but then I couldn't find the death anymore, and I was reading them, and I was like seeing the changes in the ending, and I was thinking, like, back to like at TWC, when I think it was Chinecherem Obo that read this particular story where he kills off all his characters, and we were like, how come you kill off all your characters yet we don't feel anything for them and all these things? So like, I think the stories now, they seem like they reach stronger, like, where you grow in craft and you learn like more ways of managing them. And of course, I know that, like, they've gone through like rigorous editorial processes. And so I was just like, I think general I'm just trying to like express how impressed I was with the improvement that have happened in these stories that I've read before, because I was reading them this time and they still felt fresh, like from the plot to the structure and like the character development and like the ending of the stories and everything like falls well together. So like, yeah, I'm glad you didn't kill as many of your characters as okay. So moving forward, um yeah, this was also like, I think we were just talking about this. So like, your book was like kind of a remembrance of places for me. I mean, Nsukka, the university campus, Kano, Pompai, Savongeri, like, all the streets in them, Enugu, Lagos, Nigeria. I mean, it reminded me of like some of these places that I hadn't been like consciously thinking about. It also reminded me of home, somehow that I miss home. I I also know that you're very like, you're very particular about place. Often you talk about like, the kind of places you'd love to live in, both in Nigeria and abroad, and the people in the different places you've lived in. And like, it was in particularly in Godchildren, but like in all the stories, you like introduce and develop places in your stories, as if you were introducing and developing characters. I mean, like these places, they have attitude and behaviors, and like they have different relationships with the people that live in them. So I'd love to know like why place was something you paid such attention to in this story.
Yeah, I think so. For me, it's so when I'm like in writing these stories, I wanted like I guess like because I had firstly I had started these stories with the idea that I was writing to train myself to write a novel, right?
Mhm.
And so I think like getting into each story, I treated each story as a mini novel, if that made sense. And long after I stopped thinking that it was a project in sort of getting better as a novelist, when I began to actually look at, even after I began to look at like the collection as, me writing a collection of stories for its own self,
Mhm.
um, like I realized that I was still very interested in like having a sense of fullness, right? And I think like even in reading stories, I might I might read a story that has like a simple situation, which is like a lot of short stories.
Yeah.
Two characters in a single room and just and like the situation, the conflict, the very particular conflict that have brought them together is the thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I can be impressed and like even moved by a story like that. But I do know that like I am drawn to sort of, and even in my own writing, I wanted that fullness, that sense of like just being pressed down by everything, moving through a place and feeling everything about that place. Um, and so that's just what I did in writing in writing like and also because I think even me as a person, when I'm somewhere, I'm always very aware of. And this, like it's interesting because I'm not very good at directions. Um, yeah,
I have memories of that. Like,
but also like it's I don't know. I just and I think like with a lot of the places sort of I represented in the collection, there were like a lot of I don't I don't think it was necessarily just because of the place I was writing about, because I know that like even in new material that I've been working on, some which are set here,
mhm.
um, and some which are set in cities that I never loved.
Yeah.
I am still very particular about place, and perhaps the sort of depressive feeling that comes from even maybe writing a place like that is sort of an effect of how those places even made me feel in real life, right? So that when I'm describing a place that feels very stripped down and and describing sort of the pallor of just walking around the place with sort of white picket fences and nobody on the streets and like buses that are always so where in which people are always so well behaved. It is still place like that is functioning, and but it is a more stripped down version of a place.
Yeah.
um but it is still place, right? And I think for me, I think like because I am someone who is keenly affected by where I am, where I live in. I think when imagining my characters, I also imagine that they would move through a place as though like just as people who are affected by such places. Yeah. And also because and you also know this, like growing up back home, if you've lived like for a long time with people, their problems become your problems, like maybe not in a very like active sense, but it's just on your mind, right? Everything you sort of observe everything, you see everything, you care for everything. You're like, why is this like why are these schools like this, why can't this schools, so it's just sort of the emotions, the things you feel for a place kind of translates um at the moment of sort of creation. Yeah.
Okay. That was like that was a very broad answer. I mean, like, and I think I also like got the sense of what you said about thinking about some of the stories as like as a novel,
Mhm.
because some of them like have structures I think can be stretched beyond like their current limit as short stories.
Mhm.
And and also like even with like the ones where you were aiming for a simple structure. I mean, I was reading Michael's Possession, and it's it's um it's only in 10 pages, and the whole story began and happened like just in the same place, of course, with like the flashbacks and all. So I think like there are these different things in the story, and like now that you are talking about like the process of like bringing it all together and the ways you were thinking about it, it even makes more sense to me. And I was also like thinking seriously about class
Mhm.
in this collection because um so one thing this book does is that it like it presents like the lives of queer people in Nigeria in all their like complexities and complications. So I mean the common description I've seen online is that it's a it's it's a book, it's a collection of stories about queer love in Nigeria, but that doesn't even go to like incorporate all the book is about, because I mean, excuse me, so like class is a very recurring feature in most of the stories in the collection, and mostly like it's I was reading it as a function of agency, especially agency for security. You see that like almost throughout the book, the characters are paired alternatively in relation to class. And somehow it seems like um, within like the homophobic societies they live in as queer characters, it's first it's a crime to be gay, but like the real unforgivable crime is the audacity to be gay and poor, because like the characters that fall within this later category are the ones that suffer most. And in the moment of the climactic conflict, the rich ones are immediately absorbed by wealth. You can say this, like let's say in the case of like Ibrahim, or even like people that are not that wealthy like Somadina, and the ways that like things happen, and I mean their family status could like save them from some of the backlash, because you are reading and you see like, but now like it seems like the at least to the extent that wealth can afford such grace as absorption. And in this way the book is like a literary discourse on class as it relates to queer life. And I was like, and I know that like this is a real thing, even like in like within like such difficult groups, you see that like there is also like the normal stratification we see in like in our everyday society. And I would like love for you to like talk about this, the way you like saw it and how you try to like bring it into the book.
Yeah. So Nigeria is a very classed country, and also because a lot of people are poor. Like, I mean, it's just the ways in which class functions in that country. It's the way that race, not exactly the same thing, but of course, if we're going to sort of create parallels, the way race functions here, it seems like here race is the first thing.
Mhm.
Um, Back home, it's like, someone looks at you, they're looking at what you're wearing. You go to church and people are like, these things are real. Like, people are always like, okay, what is this person wearing? What does it say about them? How does this person speak English? What does it say about them? How much respect do we accord to somebody? You know, depending on how much who they know and how much they have in their bank account and what they can do for or to me. Um, so it's like wherever you move, power, like, power is in the room. The chief is in the car and he's doing his thing, and he knows that like when the police stops them, what
Yeah.
he has to do is just to sit a certain way and just to say, hey, what's up? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
he doesn't move with the same anxieties as, let's say, a character like Awal.
Yeah.
um, just the sheer fact of like two people staying in a room and like sharing that room and having an intimate moment and being afraid that a neighbor would hear them versus someone in a duplex who doesn't have those same anxieties, right? And I think for me, it was just the same thing with place. It's just a matter of showing as clearly and as keenly as possible what I had observed. you know, and I think class is just at the center of all our interactions back home. And like, I think with the pairings, which is also very interesting because, you know, if it seems as though like, yeah, but there's a certain kind of like class division, but it seems that people across class cannot afford to do without each other. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like it's either, you know, someone from a different class is working for you, and we both know how sometimes relationships can be blurred, where let's say someone who is your cook begins to sort of function as though they are some kind of part of the family, even though really they are not.
Yeah.
Um, and so like relationships exist across class, even whether it's like through service, or even there are a lot of also sexual and romantic relationships across class. Um, and sometimes a lot of times people live in the same neighborhoods. I remember um, during the editing process, my editor had, she was like, "Oh, would this character live here?" Because she had like looked up, I think, sort of where one of the characters' schools was located, and in the American system, of course, you go to school like based on where you live, which is not the same thing
Yeah.
back home. And so like, people go to school. You see people who are like really wealthy in school with people who are really poor. Um, People living on the same street with people who live in duplexes, and then people who live in like very squalid situations. And so it's like always in your face. The rich cannot escape the poor back home. The poor, no matter how much they try, they make policies to drive people out of the streets, to drive beggars and people who sell on the streets away, to just sort of remove the evidence of just the injustice. But it's always going. That's how Nigeria is. You can't really have a neighborhood where you go build your neighborhood, right? Where there are only rich people. People will come there and sell things on the streets. And so,
Yeah.
like, for me, it's just capturing that sort of the realness of it all, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. And so, okay, now you see, it's like um it's like a while going home at night, and Bompai, even like the real Bompai, how like you go into Bompai and there is like this big duplexes, and surrounding these duplexes are like shacks, or like the kind of like poor houses you could like see in most parts of Pompeii. And even sometimes you are passing in front of these poor houses and you see like people like sleeping in front of the gates and all that. So there is always that intermingling of people across these classes. And I also like love the way the new like idea you brought about it. It's not always like sort of like intimate intermingling, but sometimes it's service, it's employment, it's all these things. And also the thing you also talked about power, because I was actually thinking about class,
Mhm.
not just in and of itself, but also as it relates to power. Because like in the book there is hard and soft power, the kind of like power you see with that chief exercises, and there is also the kind of power that Nnamdi like exercises um, over Binyelum and Somto. And so it's like there are different ways in which it's utilized through the story. Sometimes it's facilitated by class, as we see with Chief and Awa. Sometimes by like status, as in the case of Lanre. I mean, this cis heterosexual man who wields both his managerial resources and the secrecy of Somto's affairs with Kayode. Like there are like other like instances of this, and it's also like sort of reflects the world we live in today. I mean, we live in a world where power is the ultimate currency of control, and often it is simply what makes the difference between what is right and acceptable as opposed to what isn't. And I mean, I've been also reading about like this book as it relates to like the power structures in it. It also made me think about the recent overturning of Roe v. Wade. It's where like a strong institution of men, some really denies women one of the fundamental rights to their body, And like in every case of an oppressed group, power, both like internal and external, has sway. And in simply telling this like queer stories, you kept touching on this fact, and I was wondering if it was an intentional move for you.
So I think like, and I think I think like in recent years it began to dawn on me that like men might actually be kind of the most passive aggressive people on earth. You know what I mean? Like it's so also because we're socialized sort of in this sort of um, heterosexual system. There are certain things we are supposed to expect, right?
Mhm.
Um, there are certain things we are supposed to. There are certain misconceptions we were raised with, right? And certain dynamics we expect between, like, for example, men and women, right?
Yeah.
Um, and but then, of course, you're growing up as a gay boy without any kind of, what is it called, without having seen anything, with, without any form of blueprint, I guess. Um, and you're learning relationships, and you're seeing things, and you're experiencing things, and you realize, oh, it seems as though that that in virtually every interaction with people, like even when it's unnecessary, there seems to be at the center a grapple for power, even like in the most intimate relationships, right?
Yeah.
And it just, so for me, just generally, it was with the collection, it was just how do I, um, and also like power is also, I guess it's also like, because when you talked about status and talked about just like one's position in the world, not necessarily as a matter of class, but even I guess like as a matter of like how they look or um, just their sexuality. And I guess like what the society allows you to get away with um, also contributes to how much power you have. Um, so for me, and a lot of the relationships in the collection are not always, the relationships are not always, they're not always loving. There are times in which like a relationship sort of is possible or only possible by, through means of control or, and for me, it was also important to make sense, or at least to try and make sense of, you know, and in the writing process, not perhaps not consciously, but I guess at the back of my mind, I was thinking as well, what does it mean to love someone versus, you know, having a desire to control someone or to have control over someone. Um, and so, like for me, it's just, grappling with these questions of what love is and how do we identify it, how do we and how do we even like also embody it, right? So if I say I love someone, and like, would I really want to have a certain kind of, or would I want to really want to have control over their life? You know what I mean? Like, it's just, so for me, it's like thinking through some of the things I've like the experiences I was having or the things I was observing, and sort of seeing how power functions in intimate relationships, um, and what it means to sort of let go. You know what I mean? And what it means to also experience a relationship that is loving, and in which even that desire to have control or to have power over one isn't there. To be honest, we're just like here, and just the best interest and the best wishes for the person you care about is at the center of your emotions, I guess.
Yeah. Um, so it's the thing you just said, like also, it's kind of complicates how you read some of the characters. Take, for instance, Obum and Ibrahim,
Hmm.
and like what happens between them and how Ibrahim like changes over time. So if you compare like Obum's relationship with Ibrahim with Obum's relationship with Ralo, you see that like what you just like described comes to light because it's it's like with Ralo, he's with this person that really cares about him, And I mean, like, not like even it's not actually about like their relationship being perfect, but they're in like this relationship where like to Ralu to a large extent, even when he's frustrated about certain things and all, the welfare of this person like still like thrives in the ways that he sees him and the ways he treats him. And but with Ibrahim, it's like this touch and go thing where like this person ghosts him for a long time and all of a sudden he's back into his life. And I was also reading it as an intentional move because even when he tries to like excuse Obum tries to excuse Ibrahim's character as like Ibrahim dealing with things, you also see that there is that intentionality with like every behavior that comes from Ibrahim towards Obum. And it just like it made me feel like pity for Obum when I like in reading his like relationship with this person, and this was something that is supposed to like be an intimate space, and you see how like one person is exploiting that space, and or because both of them are really like dealing with whatever difficulty comes from them having to be in a gay relationship. And also yeah, like thank you. So and I don't know, like, so for me, like to a large extent, this was also like this a good number of the stories in this collection were also like sad. I mean, not in a bad way. I mean, not in a way that affects the quality of the stories or the writing. Undoubtedly, there is like these moments of humor, like the men screaming away on Lagos. I mean, I could like really imagine those men it's like something I've witnessed over and over. Or Kamara telling Somadna how they plate the mother through at the dad missed that struck the brother on the head. I it was supposed to be sad, but I found that oddly amusing. I mean, like, I was like, oh, poor boy. Even the lady asking Lotana, you want poke, like those kind of things, the way these ridiculous moments are interjected in very serious sequences, like they threw me off with amusement. Um, and because I felt like, the sadness in most of the story, I was also like truly grateful for how Mother's Love ended. I mean, it's not really like, I wouldn't say it's like, the perfect ever after ending, but there is like, I felt like hope at the end of that story in a different way from like the rest of the stories. And the comic moments though aren't the sequence of the stories, which is where the sadness lies. I kept wondering about your moods in the moment of writing these stories, and in which one had to like you have to like clutch your heart in the good times because you are having the premonition that the wrecking ball will soon fall. So I was thinking, like, was that something you had to struggle with, like the sadness of your characters becoming your sadness? How did you manage your mind in the period of producing these stories that tell of many like unpleasant experiences?
Yeah, I guess my sadness actually just became my character's sadness.
All right, I'm sorry about that. But I can
Like,
imagine.
yeah, I remember Bolaho asking me one time, he was like, Arinze, when would you write happy stories? I was like, Bolaho, leave me alone. Oh."
It's funny because like people I keep wondering, people had like, are there ever happy stories?
Yeah. And I have actually been on a quest for a happy story, but I think I'm going to give up. But but yeah, I think for me mostly it was, I think at some point in writing the collection, I just I guess I was looking at the ways because it's at some point it had seemed impossible to me that it's the kind of life I dreamed of. was possible in Nigeria,
Yeah.
right? Um, and and I guess for me, I've always wanted a very simple, like the most cliche, the most predictable life, which is I remember like when I was just in secondary school, I was still a teenager. I would just fantasize. I'll just stay and I'll be fantasizing about how I would, be a priest and have a very nice, mind you, a priest in a very nice parish, not in a parish where I'll be like I'd imagine how I'll be a priest in a nice, but then I would feel guilty. I'm like, okay, don't I want to help like the parishes that look like the parish in which I grew up? And I
Mhm.
would imagine, okay, being a priest there, but also being educated enough to have enough money and have
Yeah.
enough choir, and I would have a wife and 2 kids, and I would have my nice sermons and have my time with my parishioners and come back and have my private time with my family. Like I've always like it was just that was my imagination, right? Of course, I didn't love women the way I loved men. I only loved women as friends and sisters and mothers, aunties, not as lovers.
Yeah.
And so like when it dawned on me that, oh, actually, at some point I couldn't even imagine that I would, like when it dawned on me that, oh yeah, these feelings you have for boys, this is who you are, right? It took me a while again to then begin to be able to imagine that what I was dreaming I would have with a woman, that it was actually possible with a man, right?
Yeah.
And even when I began to see myself in that, like imagine it in my head, I also did not believe that it was even possible to have like a loving relationship back home. And I think for me, it's so a lot of the stories came from a place of just imagining what's possible, and then also like looking at the society and seeing the ways in which society had created limitations.
Mhm.
And so it was almost impossible to sort of look at those limitations and feel any kind of happiness or feel any kind of good. Just so it was, and also just when you sort of combine it with just the immense poverty you know that was around. You were there, of course.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
it was for us and a lot of our classmates while we were in Soka. Everybody just struggling and doing their best with very little, and a lot of people with nothing. Um, so it's like a lot of those stories came from that hunger, you know, for just a better life and easy life. I remember there was a time I put on Facebook, I was like, oh my God, all I just need is just a room of my own with a refrigerator that was full of assorted things. and, I guess like for a lot of people that, that might just, yeah, but like at that point in my life, that was all I needed to just make me feel um, okay. And maybe also like maybe a nice man to cuddle with might have been an added dose of goodness.
That's
But
very important.
but you see what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you're producing out of like that need, out of sort of like your current life, your present life. Um, and so like it's sort of affected a lot of the stories and the feelings that were around the stories. I would like to say also that last year when I went back home and I saw like just the possibility, especially with some of my friends with whom like we had gone through it together,
Yeah.
and seeing like just basically that they had wonderful love in their lives.
Yeah.
uh, it's not, of course it's not open, they're not like flaunting their lovers the way they might have been free to do here, but just the fact that they're able to have some kind of private life,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that just gave me hope and gave me, I guess, just sort of changed the way I walked in a way. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Like, like thank you so much for like going into that deeply. And somehow like this like segues so like perfectly into this. So I had this like encounter in 2019. I'm just going to like give a background before the next question. So like I witnessed this person who claimed to be bisexual, saying that after being in a brief gay relationship, they wouldn't identify with the community because gay people were all about sex and nothing more.
Hmm.
And they made this claim in comparing gay relationships to like heteronormative ones.
Unless I'm a woman.
Yeah, a woman, in the sense that being gay doesn't like involve a wholesome romantic life. I haven't really like stopped thinking about that because I know that their opinion was both untrue and unfair. I think so because like untrue because sex is the primary for me, I understand sex as the primary expression of sexuality. It's the same for like gay people as it is for like cis heterosexual people.
Mhm.
And I think it's unfair because of like this person, intentionally or not, wouldn't acknowledge the suppression of gay lives in Nigeria, which leaves them little room to like express themselves in other ways, say leading an open romantic life, marriage, raising families, just about like all the ways that we can see heterosexual people live out their days in our different societies.
Mhm.
So 3 years later, I'm reading your book and I'm feeling so thankful about how it collects, different forms of gay life in these complex narratives. I'm thinking more about like the coming of age characters like Binyelum Somadina, Lotanan Kamsi Obuman, Ibrahim Alwal, and Idris, like how their stories begin like every other childhood love story until they're discovered and like ordered, like the other and the corruption that enters their lives and complicates it in these peculiar ways. So these things kind of like pile extra weight on the other general complications of everyday life. Um, so like I wish I could like go back to that person and like wave this book in front of them and say, here is an illustration of like what a full like gay living is. Like everything like they left out in their claim against like gay people. So it's like what you were saying, sort of like what you just said also like reinforce that because like gay people in Nigeria lived in this very like, suppressed societies. There's a way that it's like it clams like their life and it's just like I know it's a very like, because I've like witnessed it as a at a very like close space and I know what like it really is. So yeah.
Mhm. Thank you, Isa.
Yeah. So I think like the last thing I want to say is that there are like still like for me happy things in the story, like the music.
Mhm.
I was like thinking Arinze's publisher needs to make a God's Children playlist on Spotify because like there is so much music in this book, I swear. Like if you like go through the book, it has someone needs to make a list of this music. And I know that music is also one of the loves of your life and, and stuff. So yeah, it seems like you were listening to a lot of music when you were writing the stories.
Yes, I was. I remember like there was actually what the singer said about love. I had written. I think I don't know if you remember when I wrote that story. I was working at St. Thomas, and I spent a lot. Remember then? I think you were at the house on because then you were serving in Kano,
Yeah.
and the house. What's the name of
I
that
was
street?
at Yankaba.
No, no, not Yankaba at the time. The streets close to St. Thomas.
Um oh
Yeah,
my goodness.
yeah. So that was
Oh,
what you were
sorry,
doing.
I forgot.
And
But it's just close to Airport Road.
I just close to Airport Road, and and so around that period, I was listening to. I remember then I would like come see you, and I would go to St. Thomas. I would go home, and then I was listening to this song by James Bay. Um, what's the title of the song again? Let It Go or Let It
Yeah,
Be.
yeah. Let it either let it be or let it go. I know this.
Yeah, and that was the. So usually there's usually a song that's on repeat or a few songs that are on repeat. Um, and I remember like what I was feeling around that period was just I just felt good around that period, right? Um, I would I would come to like walking home and listening to music. I could just not wait to sit down with the laptop. And like also just even in moments when I'm not listening to music, I always imagine because music makes me feel things. Like
Yeah.
if the song is sad, if I'm sad, I want to listen to something that actually brings out that sadness so I can have a proper cry and I'll go to bed. If I'm happy, I want to listen to something that makes me want to dance. You know what I mean? Like, and so for me, it's in also writing the stories. I wanted that like just those feelings to be there. So if my character is sad or they are thinking through some things, um, what are the songs that ordinarily would you know would come to mind? And I just like put it there. If they are like having a romantic or loving moment, what kind of song is going to like have like contribute to the mood, right? And I just put it there. Like sometimes I imagine that maybe readers would know these songs and it would play in their heads, or they would. Sometimes they might not like, but just to get that sense of and I think because music, like for a lot of us, a lot of people are always like with their headphones and their and so as I am as well. So it was just a matter of showing what was there. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for like including all those like songs. I know all of them from like early 20s, P Square's Doom Me to like Black Sam, and then there is the classical Fuelis and Tiwa Savage. So it's like it's one of the coolest things about the book. Unfortunately, like we've actually exceeded our time, and I'm so happy to like to have had this final moment with you. Thank you so much.
That's also beautiful.
Oops, sorry, muted. Thank you both so much for an incredible conversation. We do have a little bit of time. We don't have any questions from the audience. So Ebenezer, if you had one last question you wanted to ask before we depart, the floor is yours.
Did you say me or Arinze?
Oh, you. Yeah. If you wanted to ask one more question of Arinze before we go, we've got a bit of time.
I think like there are like so many things I want to ask and talk about this book, but like I'm just like curious, or maybe like some people in the audience are also curious as to like what are you working now? Are you taking a break? I think it's the most common question. Have you already started like, okay, this is out. I'm on to the next thing. So where are you right now?
I think emotionally, I'm so ready for the next. And I remember I was in New York, and while I was in New York, I felt very relaxed, and there was this pump of creativity, and I just began to sort of. I went back to what I was working on, and then I came back to Florida, and I got like all these emails. And they were like, "Oh, you have to attend this class and do this and do that," and I was just like, "Oh, Jesus Christ!" But but yeah, like mentally, I guess sometimes when I feel frustration about like work I don't want to do, it's usually because I want to be doing something else. I'm just like, oh my god, this is so frustrating. But yeah, like I just need to find that that space to keep up the excitement. But yeah, I am psychologically moving towards the next thing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll all be like waiting for the next day.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. This was really exciting.
It's very rare to hear an author at the end of a tour talk about like being inspired to come back and start the new project. Usually it's like, oh, I need to take like a month. So that's very exciting, except for all of the extra work that's been placed on your desk first. But yes, hopefully for the next book, we'll have you in the actual bookstore and we can do this again. But thank you, both of you, for joining us this evening at Home with Literati. You can purchase God's Children Are Little Broken Things, and the links in the description. There's also a link below me if you're watching us later on YouTube. Arinze Ifeakandu, Ebenezer Agu, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Hope you continue to stay safe and be well. And to all of our viewers out live and at home and into the future, we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Have a great evening all. Take care.
All right. Bye. Thank you so much.